And now I kind of wanted to open a small parenthesis. You know, some of you may be thinking, okay, but how is this being even happening? Like, these are pretty massive things. Like, you've literally refactored the entire code base. Why didn't you even know? Or how do these things even happen? So there's no one like simple answer. It's basically a concert of things. As some of you may know, in the React Native space, there's Meta, of course, that it's like the owner, the original creator, but there's also an ecosystem of partners. Among those partners is, of course, Microsoft and other companies, and what we do is invest and collaborate a lot on the success of React Native itself. All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's great to be here. I know that you want to hear all about React Native, but before, let me talk a bit about myself. I wanted to start by just saying a big ciao, Torino, because as probably just one person in the room, actually just one person in the room knows, I actually went to the Politecnico here. That was my graduation thesis, and while I was trying to look for pictures that were not cringe about me at uni, I actually managed to find a picture of me doing React Native for the first time back in 2016. This was more or less around like React Native 0.27, 28. Is anyone else in the audience been around or been using React Native ever since? Oh, lovely. Yes, Tosh, perfect. Yeah, it's probably better if you weren't using React Native back then. It was quite a mess, as we'll be talking a bit about in a second here. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lorenzo Sciandra, as Lucy was just saying. You may know me as Skillset. I'm a senior software engineer at Microsoft, and I've been a maintainer and releaser of React Native for almost 5 years. Well, maintainer for more than 5 years, releaser a bit less, but we're getting there. And that picture and my face may not look familiar to you, but maybe this does. If you ever use React Native or you're on GitHub, usually you may see me closing your issues or commenting on your PRs, so you're welcome, or I'm sorry, either one. We can talk it out, I'm sure about that. But enough about me. Let's talk about the problem that I want to share with you all today. You know, when it comes to React Native, usually, especially at these type of events or like in blog posts, in YouTube videos, what you hear about are like the big, new, shiny things. And usually that means talking about the new architecture, as Umberto was mentioning earlier, talking about the new feature coming in the new releases. Like, I'm part of that problem in a way because I want you to use the latest version, so I'm always trying to be like, hey, look at this, it's shiny, right? Right? And also, of course, Expo, as always, bringing a ton of hype and a ton of like good, interesting features. And I know that Tomasz later today will share more about that. But you know, when it comes to React Native, and this picture kind of gives it away, but like there's so much more going on. Usually the part that people talk about is much less than everything happening. And me, I'm usually down there. And that kind of like is what I would call the boring side of React Native. That's probably why we're all the way down there. But this is where usually we talk about the processes, we do documentation work, we do refactorings. And today, what I want to do is kind of like get you down there with me so that I can show you a bit what's going on all the way down. And to do that, let me start with something that might look familiar, but we're not going to talk about releases in the usual way. You know, when it comes to releases, most of you told or like think about like the newest one. Right now, it's of course 71. I wanted to get here on stage and be like, no, it's 72. We had a couple problems, so it's coming up next week, I hope. But we're not going to talk about the new shiny things. We're going to talk about how things started, actually. When I did my first ever release, which was 57.4, this one, as you can see, things were not quite like they are today. For example, like poor communication, like it just barely says September. It's like, what version title is that, Lorenzo? Why did you even put that there? There was a lot of tribal knowledge. For example, the only people doing releases back when, it was like me, Mike Grabowski, and I think a third person, but basically we're all people from the community, and we were just sharing with each other, like verbally, how to do things. There were no documentation. We were just like, okay, oh yeah, for that thing you need to do this and then that. And like that also meant that if we weren't around for any reason, if one of us was sick, like the release couldn't happen pretty much, which wasn't great. And of course, lack of testing. Like we were kind of like doing things blindly. We were trying our best for sure, but I think that some of the practices that were in place back then were not the greatest, and some people, you know, when upgrading or were trying new versions, they may have experienced crashes that could have been avoided. And that's why today things look more like this. As you can see, we have changelogs, which is great. We had to create a custom tool that would work for the very specific way React Native is created, but now it's there and we use it constantly. We have documentation. I know this is gonna sound weird because like usually it's pretty hard already to convince people to write documentation. We had to write documentation to document the processes to do releases, so it's even less interesting. But it's so good that we have it there because finally I can take a vacation and not worry that no one will be able to do it without me. And then, of course, we have processes. Like, for example, we have the discussions. Maybe if you've been using React Native for production work, you've seen that like you can come to the discussion for the minor you're using. You can ask for a commit to be cherry-picked if you have a problem that has already been solved by a commit in main or in another release. And we will try our best to pick it up and bring it into the version. And not only that, as you may have noticed also in the other screenshot I was showing earlier, when we do announce a new version, you'll usually see 4 people in the blog post announcing it, and that's the release crew. Like, we have now got to the point where we have 2 people from the community, 2 engineers from Meta on rotation working as the release crew for a specific new version, which is incredible. That means that we can share knowledge, we have redundancy, and we have rotation. Like, for example, I was in the 70 crew, I'm in the 71, I'm being in 72, of course, but like I'm gonna rotate out for 73, and other things can move also. Other engineers can come in both from Meta and from the rest of the community. And not just that, we're also looking at improving things even more. For example, one of the things I'm working on is the addition of end-to-end testing on CI on the GitHub side of React Native. This is because a lot of what we do as a release crew boils down to testing and making sure the release is stable, and if we hit something, we can fix it so that we hit the wall first so that you will be able to use React Native more easily once we release it. And overall, this is great because it means that we can create more stable releases and reduce the human error. And this is great, but we're engineers, we want numbers. So let me show you, this is actually working. So probably this may look a bit too small, so clickety, there it is. We have actually the number. So as you can see here, we actually managed to get 71 to higher than 50%. Like this to me, it's madness. Like I wasn't ever imagining, since I started doing releases, I would have never expected one single version to become so prominent in the number of downloads. By the way, this is like the weekly downloads. So we keep constant track of all the numbers and everything to kind of like assess how things are going. And seeing 71 being a 55% right now, like I took this screenshot the other day, so it's very, very recent. It's huge. It means that the new processes, the things that we're doing to make releases more stable and less error prone are actually working. And yes, I know, some of you may be thinking, wow, this is absolutely boring. Why am I even listening to a guy talking about processes? Don't worry, we can do better. I can be more boring. I can be more convoluted. So let me actually talk to you about my other baby project that took us almost a year to get through. So when it comes to React Native, as I've been already teasing while I was speaking earlier, it's not your usual repository. It's not your usual process of working in a code base. Some of you may think, oh yeah, I just need to go on GitHub. There's the React Native folder, right? And that's it. No, that would be too easy and too painless. So things are actually a bit more complicated. This graph is kind of like simplifying a bit, but basically what we have in the React Native folder is both the React Native node module, the one that you want to use, and we deploy through NPM, but also it's a monorepo with like 20 other packages within it. And as you can see here, Well, first off, you may be like, hang on a second, how can that node module not bring along everything else then? That's a great question. It shouldn't. And the way we actually fix that problem is through black magic. Like what we do is pretty much like when we create a branch for working on a new release, we cut off some settings so that it will not get picked up, which is not ideal. Another thing that you may have noticed is actually that it's very inconsistent. Like some of these packages are not on the same namespace. The versioning, some packages are on version 3. We're still struggling to get React Native to 1.0. How is it possible that some packages are on a different major entirely? And like also, how do you even publish those packages? Well, turns out the only way, and this is something that I learned way too far into the process, like last year, I think I only realized this, but basically all these packages could only be released manually by meta engineers. Like there wasn't even anything on CI. It wasn't automated at all. And I was actually able to find a video of us trying to get some of these packages to work. As you can see, everything went completely fine the entire time. But anyway, jokes aside, how do we solve it? Because yes, we did solve it. Again, as I was saying, it took us almost a year. But what we did in 12 months was take React Native and bring it down into the package. And you're like, oh my God, this is so revolutionary. Why did it take you so long? Well, that's a great question. So, well, the reason is that because React Native itself is actually a reflection of the code that lives within Meta. So it was very complicated to get this done because it had to first happen within their internal systems. So it took us actually a super long time. And not just that, by doing this, now that it's a proper monorepo, we are also able to rename some packages and do reversioning. As you can see here now, every package is on the same minor as React Native itself. So this means that we can do targeted releases for any of these other packages for that specific minor. Also, they're in the same namespace, which is like so much more consistent. And because finally things are working the way they're supposed to, we can do automation, which is, oh, so good. Now all I need to do is run a script, push on CI, and everything works automatically. Well, most of it, but it's still like such a huge change. And I'm happy to report the 72 is going to be the first one implementing these new systems. And yeah, as I was just mentioning, by the way, this job was only doable thanks to some engineer at Meta called Ruslan. And like his work was absolutely essential to make it happen. So like this is like a shout out to him because like literally when he jumped on the project and we were like 8 months into it, we were like, okay, this is probably gonna take another 8 months. And like in 2 months, he came in, he made it happen. We were like, oh my God, yes, thank you. So, but yeah, so why this is good? Why does it even matter? Well, first off, it allows for further granularity. Now that we have everything that works and everything set up, nothing is really preventing us from adding more folders to the monorepo or splitting the React Native folder even further. What if it was React Native iOS and React Native Android? Or we split things even further. That allows for more control and more automation, right? And also makes things easier to contribute. All of a sudden, you don't need like, oh, welcome to React Native. Here's the list of all the weird things that you have to do if you want to contribute. Like, please make sure you don't fall into any of the traps. And, you know, it scared a lot of people off. Like, a lot of people, when talking to me, were like, oh, I would love to contribute, but it's too complicated. And I was like, yeah, I totally get it. And I really hope that now with this change, we're going to be able to make it easier for everyone. So basically, I do a lot of massively boring stuff, absolutely. But also, these things are building up to a very exciting future overall. And now, I kind of wanted to open a small parenthesis. You know, some of you may be thinking, okay, but how is this being even happening? Like, these are pretty massive things. Like, you've literally refactored the entire code base. Why didn't you even know? Or how do these things even happen? So there's no one like simple answer. It's basically a concert of things. As some of you may know, in the React Native space, there's Meta, of course, that it's like the owner, the original creator, but there's also an ecosystem of partners. Among those partners is, of course, Microsoft and other companies. And what we do is invest and collaborate a lot on the success of React Native itself. So for example, there's the discussion and proposal repository. This repo is where you may find all the RFCs. If you want to get a glimpse of what may be changing further down the road, you should go there and have a look. And also these communications are all in the open, because we really want people to be able to see what's happening and even, contribute or comment on them. Even for smaller working groups, for example, the one on this on the left side here is a working group that we as Microsoft started last year to talk about Metro with the Metro team, the bundling tool, of course, for React Native. And not just that, like very, very recently, like at App.js, more or less a month ago, Alex Hunt from the developer experience team at Meta literally announced a new working group for debugging, because we finally are trying to also address that problem. And yeah, as you can see, like we're trying to literally keep all of these as in the open as possible and as interactive as possible. So some of you, maybe, I hope, maybe at least one of you, maybe asking yourself, like, how can I get involved? Like, this looks great. I have my own ideas for how I want to see React Native change. I want to make it better. So again, no simple answer, sadly. But what I can do is kind of give you my personal take on how you can try to be, participating in this and shaping React Native into what you think it should be. So it's a pretty simple, but it's actually pretty complicated at the same time. So first thing, you need to have your own proposal. It needs to be tight. It needs to be very, very well done. It needs to be thought through. You need to review it. You need to prepare a document, show some graphs, have anything that you can have on your side to explain how your idea is very good. You should prepare. Once you have it, then you should show it to some of your colleagues, some of your peers, get some feedback. You want it to be very, very smooth. Like, it's basically like pitching an entire new startup or something like that. It needs to be very well done. And then at that point, what you need to try and do is go to Meta and like, hey, can we establish a partnership? Can we collaborate on this? I want this to be something that happen. Can we make it happen? To some of you maybe working on medium to bigger size companies, this is how you sell it to your leadership, by the way. You go there and like, oh, I'm going to establish a partnership with Meta. And like, oh my God. And yeah, that usually helps. And then only at that point, I wouldn't do it any earlier than that. Like once you have a collaboration with Meta sealed, that's when you do the RFC in the discussion and proposal repo. Sadly, not all the RFCs that you can see there have gone through this process. Again, this is just my personal take. But if you want to be successful, you want to see the things that you want to make happen, this is how I think you should go for it. And then at that point, you need to be ready to co-own the plan, which means working actively on it. It's not by chance that the two changes I've just shown are in a way made by Microsoft. I worked on these things directly for many, many months, years in some scenarios. And talking about made by Microsoft, this is the shameless plug slide, of course, I had to do it. We actually, aside from investing in React Native core directly with like me working on the open source, we actually do maintain, in case you don't know, macOS and Windows. You can use React Native to develop a desktop. There was a talk at Chain React, again, less than a month ago, about how they migrated Facebook Messenger from Electron to desktop, so to React Native macOS and React Native Windows, which provided huge benchmark improvements, which is incredible. And like we use it in our own production apps. Again, we have many talks. There's an entire dev blog, official Microsoft dev blog about React Native. You can go there, see all our talks, all the ways we use React Native. We also do maintain things for more like, if you're not interested in desktop, we have React Native Test App. Basically, if you have a library, this solves like 80% of your problems, because 80% of your problems come from having an example app that is always updated. And then we have RNX-Kit, which is our monorepo. This is where anything that we create as a tool internally at Microsoft and we want people to use internally, we put it out in this repository so that the entire community can benefit. So for example, the Metro serializer there is an extra plugin that we have created to add tree shaking to Metro, which is something that now it's in the works for Metro itself, but so far this is the only way to kind of like reduce the bundle size of your apps. And then we have aligned apps, which is another tool super helpful when you do upgrades, and so much more. So please, if you want to learn more, ask me directly, go to the link, follow us on platforms. But this is the parenthesis. Let's close this one off. Let's actually get to the closing of this talk, to be honest. So as I hope I have shown you, like React Native, yes, there's a lot of hype, a lot of great things going on, but it's not just that. There's so much more going on under the surface. and key companies like Microsoft and Meta are heavily invested in the success of this technology. On the flip side, this means that Meta, if you have a good idea, they will listen and probably help you get through with it, like it happened for the monorepo work. Of course, you need to know where to look. I really hope that I was able to point you in the right direction with this talk, and also be ready to put in the work. Sadly, especially now, with companies, doing layoffs and AI taking over and all these great things, is getting like, it literally needs to be a partnership. You need to be involved and work on this all together. Now we're done, in a way. We're getting up. We're done with staying all the way down there with the iceberg. And to close it off, I actually wanted to get back at the hype level and talk a second about when I started doing React Native open source, because I'm an engineer. So as most of you, when I fixate on something, I over-fixate on it, and I learn anything that I can. And what happened to me by learning the history of open source and learning how other projects do their leadership structures, or like how projects get set up and grow over time, one thing came to me while I was preparing this talk, which is, I think, a very bold statement in a way, but it's a very personal takeaway that I really believe in, which is that React Native is one of the safest bets in the entire open source space. Like, think about it. Like, some of these changes that I've just shown you, they're massive. Can you think of another open source project that is maintained by two of the biggest tech companies in the world, that is 8 years old and can still do these big changes? Like, and I even talked about the new architecture, which is another big change coming up. Like, the fact that React Native is so well covered and so able to keep evolving, to me really shows a virtue of this project as being one of the safest bet in the entire open source space. But yeah, that was me. I really hope that this talk kind of gave you a boost of trust in the project itself. And thank you for listening. I've been Lorenzo. You can find anything on my website and Twitter and all those places. And now we have a bit of a Q&A for us. Welcome, Umberto.